Once upon a time there was a king who had organized a spiritual ritual in his palace. A poor priest had been invited to perform the ritual. During the ceremony, the king posed 3 profound questions to the priest. The first question was how can God be seen? The second was how far can God see? And the third was what does God do? The poor priest, overwhelmed by the complexity of the questions, asked for some time to think of the answers. The king agreed and gave him a month to respond, but that if he failed to provide satisfactory answer, he would face the punishment of death by cutting his head. The priest returned home burdened by the king's demand. He began contemplating the answers but struggled to find anything satisfactory. As the deadline approached, his worries started to grow more, and he became increasingly restless. He had a 6-year-old son who was very wise. Observing his father's distress, the son asked what was troubling him. When the priest explained the king's questions, the boy reassured him and said, "Do not worry, father, I will accompany you to the king's court and answer his questions." The priest wondered and asked the son about the answers, but the son simply replied that he would disclose them in the king's court. Finally the day arrived, and the priest along with his son appeared before the king. The king repeated his questions and asked, "Tell me, how can God be seen? How far he can see, and what he does?" The boy stepped forward confidently and said, "Your Majesty, I will answer your questions, but before I do, please forgive me for saying this. You have not shown proper hospitality to your guests before asking such important questions. Is this the appropriate way to begin such a discussion?" Embarrassed by the boy's observation, the king immediately ordered refreshment for the guests. Since it was a child speaking, so the king decided to order milk to be served. When the milk was served, the boy dipped his finger into the glass and began examining it carefully. Puzzled by his actions, the king asked, "What are you doing?" The boy replied, "Your Majesty, I have heard that butter exists in milk, so I am trying to find it." The king laughed and said, "You silly child, butter is not found this way. Milk must be first turned into cut, and then turned to extract the butter." The boy smiled and responded, "Exactly, Your Majesty, just as there is a process to extract butter from the milk, similarly, there is a process to seek what God resides within every soul, but to realize Him one must follow discipline, practice devotion and meditation, and then He can be seen." The king was impressed by the boy's wisdom. He acknowledged the profoundness of his answer and said, "All right, now tell me, how far can God see?" The boy asked for a candle to be brought in and lit it. Then, holding the candle, he asked the king, "Your Majesty, tell me, how far does the light of this candle reach?" The king replied, "The light spreads in all the directions." The boy smiled again and said, "Correct, just as this light spreads everywhere. God can see everything and everywhere, though we cannot see Him, but He observes all our actions and keeps a record of them." The king nodded in agreement and asked for the answer of the final question, which was, "What does God do?" The boy responded with a question of his own. He said, "Your Majesty, are you asking this question as a teacher or as a student?" By now the king had developed great respect for the young boy. He humbly replied, "I am asking as a student." The boy then said, "If you are asking as a student, then why the student is sitting on the throne while the teacher is standing before him?" Realizing his mistake, the king immediately stepped down from his throne and requested the boy to sit on his throne. The boy obliged and sat on the throne, and the king, who was now standing below and before him, asked his question again, "Please tell me, what does God do?" The boy replied, "Your Majesty, you have already witnessed the answer of your question. God can do anything. He can transform a king into a common man and a common man into a king in an instant. What just happened is an example of His power." The king was deeply humbled. He bowed before the boy and said, "Meeting Someone as wise as you has opened my eyes. From this day forward you are appointed as the royal advisor of this kingdom. This simple tale teaches us that God is always with us every moment and every second, guiding us through life. We often forget to remember Him or lose faith in His presence. However, God's power is infinite. He can change our destiny in an instant. He can turn a king into a beggar, and a beggar into a king. This reminds us that life is ever-changing and that humility and faith are essential if we focus on our actions, do good deeds, and trust in God's divine timing. We too can reach the heights we aspire to in our life. Faith in God provides strength during difficult times, while good karma and sincere efforts lay the foundation for success. By living with humility, gratitude, and belief in His wisdom, we open ourselves to God's blessings, which can transform our lives and way beyond our imagination.